Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you can remain standing, normally we honor those fellow BET members who have passed. This is a little bit unusual, but certainly a true hero of Greenwich in Eugene Moy, recently passing away. And if anybody had Mr. Moy as a teacher or just as a friend, you certainly understand that Greenwich definitely has lost a special person. So if we can take a moment of silence. Thank you. Mr. Mason and I were talking with the first selectman. All three of us had Mr. Moy as a teacher. I'm not sure that, I think it was American history, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly social studies.
No, for us it was government.
Ms. Bocino as well.
It was government class, and you didn't sit in rows. You sat in a circle. He started every class. You know, he was a retired police officer as well, and you started every class with his joke books, and he would tell a couple jokes, and it just set the tone. We never had horseplay in his class. Not that he would really allow it, but we learned about government, and we did our government field trip. And one night, I'm writing a letter to the editor, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I'm at home with my family, and the phone rings, and my father answers the phone, which was rare, and he goes, "Hello, Mr. Moy," and I went, "Oh, no." And he goes, "Yes, okay, thank you." And he puts it on the phone, and I go, "Oh, I'm in deep trouble." And my father said, he goes, "He says you're doing well in his class." So Mr. Moy definitely knew how to keep the students' attention, and he will be missed.
I don't remember his jokes being very funny, but he did tell them all.
He did tell jokes. And if you were shy and quiet in class, you had to sit right next to him.
Okay. Consideration, item number 2 now comes before us, consideration of non-routine applications. For that, I will call upon the Budget Chair, Michael Mason, PD 5.
Good evening. PD 5 for the Police Department, which is a interim appropriation for $348,995 from the grant fund, and I so move that on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Mr. Mason.
PD 5 is a request to use the $348,995 from the State Enhanced 911 Grant Program. It will be used to purchase our replacement operating software for the Police Department, Fire Department, GEMS. The company, NextGen, is a company based out of New Haven, and it offers a multi-tiered program basically in the Northeast for the law enforcement and public safety side. Besides the Connecticut State Police have it, it seems that about 60% of the communities in Connecticut have already adopted this new software. The current police software was purchased in 1999, and it's been used since. This appropriation will include the installation of the new software, training monies for all of the dispatchers and officers, and if I'm at our meeting, we had the Chief Rydberg and Captain Kordick were there and ran us through the program. What happens is now is currently the police department has a series of license and softwares in which we will be getting rid of those as this comes back online. So there'll be a savings in the current fiscal year because this is an interim, and then in years going forward. We found this item quite interesting, and we had quite a package that was given to us on it, and our vote was 4 in favor, 0 against.
Before I take any questions or comments, this was originally a routine item, but not every member of the BET was at the Budget Committee, and so I thought certainly the dollar amount is significant enough, and so the Police Department is here to answer any questions if anyone has a question or comment. Mr. Norton?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a request, and I think that because of the size of the appropriation and also the fact that we're dealing with a new entity, that it's in our best interest, especially from the standpoint of our due diligence, that we have audited financial statements from the firm. And I'm not suggesting we put a condition on the appropriation, but I'm doing a request that the controller secure from NextGen a copy of their audited financial statements for the past fiscal year.
Okay, so Peter, you understand what the request is? It's fairly straightforward.
You said the next, you meant the last, year. Last year, what
At the most currently available.
next gen. Sure.
Okay. It's not being offered as a condition, just as a request. Okay, any other comments or questions? Mr. Simon?
Just one clarification, the savings that we will have in the software will be in, not the year we're in today, but the budget for which we're considering, which was fiscal year 12, because this will start on July 1st, the savings. Correct.
Further questions or comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. I can note at this time that Mr. Kelly had a previous engagement and therefore can't be with us tonight, so that vote is 11-0-0. Thank you, Chief. Captain. Mr. Hannigan. Okay, item 3 now comes before us, consideration of routine applications, and for that I call upon our clerk, Joe Pellegrino.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the following routine applications. PS1 is a request from the Parking Services Department for $40,000 for the rental equipment account. This is for snow removal purposes. PD4, a request from the Police Department. This is for $6,000 approval to use a monetary gift that was given from the Greenwich Silver Shield Association and will be used to fund the 2011 Spring Citizens Police Academy. RF7 is from the Retirement Board, and it is just a approval of the contract to be entered into with State Street for their aggregate bond index. And RF7, also from the Retirement Board, again is another contract with Dimensional Funds, and this is to enter into their emerging markets value fund.
It's been moved by Mr. Pellegrino,
Second.
second by Mr. Simon. A couple of administrative questions, and I'll open it up if there are any questions on any of these. So we did not receive an updated blue sheet. The Budget Committee reduced PS1 from, I think the blue sheet is 52,000 down to 40. I'm not in favor of necessarily creating a blue sheet and sending it out, but just so that the records are clear, we should probably have that that amendment made. And then let me call upon both the Investment Advisory Committee and then the Law Committee just to give their votes on RF7 and RF8. First, maybe Mr. Norton, if you want to start with the Investment Advisory Committee.
The Investment Advisory Committee met this afternoon at 5 o'clock and considered both of these items, and I'll vote after having a presentation made to us by the Retirement Plan Administrator, Jim Lavin. We voted 4-0 to recommend the approval of both of these items.
Ms. Martin.
The Law Committee voted thank you. The Law Committee voted 2-0 to approve this investment as to legal form only.
Okay. Any other comments or questions relative to all of these, or these 4 routine applications?
Mr. Chairman, I make one comment in regard to PF7 and RF7 and RF8. It's a reallocation of funds by the Retirement Board from a current international investment to the monies coming out of the Ontario Fund will be repositioned into these 2 funds by the Retirement Board.
Thank you. Further conversation? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Item 4 now comes before us, the Assessor's Report. Our Town Assessor, Ted Courtney, Assistant Town Assessor, Bob Ship.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm pleased to report that we were able to submit to the Office of Policy and Management of the state our testing of our revaluation, and we met all the requirements, all of the state requirements. And I'd like to just lead you through them so you have a better understanding. First, the we do a series of 4 measures of central tendency, and the basic one is a ratio study. And a ratio study is basically dividing an assessment of a property by its selling price. And so if you had an assessment of $700,000 and the house sold for $1 million, that would be a 70% ratio, and that would be the ideal ratio. We then look at the median ratio, and the median ratio is of a list or a range of ratios, the one that's in the middle. So that if you had 100 ratios in a study, the 50th would be the median. We then look at the coefficient of dispersion, and that's the measure of deviation of the average ratios from the median ratio. And in that, the state requires there be a coefficient of dispersion of 15% or less, and they consider 10% excellent. Our relationship was 9.2. We then look at the price-related differential, which measures how well we do on measuring the higher-priced homes as compared to the lower-priced homes. And in this, we look at a mean ratio divided by the aggregate mean, which basically means the average ratio divided by the sum of all of the sales prices. And there we have to meet a range of 0.98 to 1.03, and our price-related differential was 1.02. Then finally, the unsold property test was the ratio between the sold properties to the unsold, had to be between 0.95 and 1.05, and ours was 1.25. So we not only met the requirements, but we met them in an outstanding way. In addition to that study, just a couple of other remarks. First, the Board of Assessment Appeals today was the last day to appeal assessments, and the total number of appeals that they received is approximately 500. In 2005, when we did the revaluation, they had over 1,000, and last year, a non-revaluation year, they had 277. They'll be holding the hearings in the first week, for the most part, of April. The proud to report that the land influence factor availability is now being made available to the public by a computer that we've reconfigured in our office, and also on the CD that we make available to the public. And that was completed on the 15th of March. And then the senior tax relief program, basically, it has to be filed by May 13th. We did send out a reminder letter last week to those who had not yet applied for it. So it is necessary, if you're applying for the first time, to have it in our hands by the 13th of May. And final thing is, we did send out the income and expense reports to income property owners. They have to be filed each year, and there is a penalty. The date is June 1st, so we will ask anyone who has an income property to complete that form and to get it back to us. Be glad to answer any other questions that you might have.
Questions for the assessor? So Ted, I want to go back to the reporting to the state.
Yes.
So when you talk about the property, the median ratio, for
Yes.
that matter, any ratio, what's the time frame that you use?
We're using the year immediately preceding the assessment day, so it would be like October 1st of 2009 to October 1st, 2010.
And I know you've given us some information, but can you talk a little bit about the difficulties in assessing higher end properties from less valuable properties, at least in terms of their assessed value? And I see on your last page you provided us with a correction that the Greenwich Time ran as a result of the front page article concerning the Helmsley estate. I wish they would run
a correction the same size as the original original article. But can you, with not necessarily dwelling on that case, can you talk about what your analysis has shown relative to especially the larger priced properties in town?
Yes, let me just start by saying that on the sale of the Helmsley estate, it involved 4 adjacent properties, and the Time reporter only considered the one parcel, not the other parcels that supported the property. So they thought that we had underassessed it by $6.6 million, when in reality we had assessed it slightly higher than the selling price, $800,000 higher than the selling price. In terms of assessing the higher-end properties, it becomes more difficult because the numbers are higher when you're in the higher-end properties. And it's possible to have greater variance in what people are willing to pay for high-end properties. It could be that some people are just are willing to pay more simply because they want that certain property, or others are looking for a deal and they're not willing to pay as much. This is true of all properties, and this is why we do the sales ratio studies, is because we're looking to see what the standard deviations are. And in all cases, we're trying to reduce the deviations so that we're close both on the low end and the high end. And we have done a better job this year than I think we've done in the past because we have concentrated on trying to do the better job.
Thank you. Further question, Mr. Simon?
Probably the last question you want to hear. But when are you now planning to, when does the state now require us to do the next revaluation?
5 years from now, which would be 2015.
Grand list.
Yes.
All right. And
Or, I'm sorry, yes, 2015.
that's the
Grand list.
max, that's the maximum period?
Yes.
And the minimum is 4 years or 3 years or 2 years?
There's no minimum. It could be any period. Yes, you could.
Thank you.
So Mr. Simon raises a good point. I didn't know he was going to raise it tonight. I'm glad that he did. As a matter of policy, at least an informal policy, this board had adopted an every 4-year cycle. We had quite a discussion, and in fact, Ted, you had proposed to us to do it sooner than that, and we decided that we didn't want to do it any sooner than every 4 years, and certainly at the time, at least, the discussion surrounded the fact that we didn't want to do it every 5 years, one, just in case we found ourselves in the position that we found ourselves these last 2 years. So we should probably start thinking about that, and maybe the reval team on their, as they wrap up their work, because that's starting to wrap up at least for this reval, can maybe come forward with a recommendation in the next couple months as to when we should be doing that, and if in fact, if it's a formal policy that we want to enact. I don't think we have one, although I'm testing my own memory here. Maybe we can pass it right along within Mr. Finger's office, and it can go to his policy committee hat, and we can talk about doing that, because I think it's an important enough decision where we might want to codify that and set that down as a policy of the board.
Because I think what would be helpful is to hear the pluses and minuses of doing it every 3 years or every 4 years. I think every 5 years is a bad decision because, as you point out, then you have to get an exemption from the state. And also, in a town like Greenwich, we're probably more subject to market differences. We're not like a uniform set of houses here, and to the extent that you can bring our houses back into market price on a more timely basis, I think makes for a fair tax burden.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington.
Ted, could you please tell us what are daily certificate journals? Under the administrative support, you talked about daily certificate journals have been sent to finance and the tax collector through March 13th. Are they done every day, or why have you put this forth in this particular report?
We have to inform both the tax collector and the finance department as we make changes. We don't make them every day, but we kind of group them into like 4 or 5 day periods. And we then report that we're keeping them up to date. And so this is when we batch a group of changes and send them to the two departments. And that's so that everyone is working from the same set of numbers.
So these changes, the results of the informal hearings, because we haven't had the Board of Appeals yet, or are they deeds recorded, or what are these things that you're sending them?
It's all changes that are made. We make certificates of correction when we find errors, and we transfer information from all the different activities that are going on.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve the assessor's report? Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Pellegrino. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 11-0-0. Thank you, both gentlemen. Item 5 now comes before us, the Comptroller's report, our town comptroller.
Good evening, everyone. A couple of comments on the report. On the bottom of page 2, I talked a little bit about the insurance renewal, and that was preliminary numbers in January. Two things. One, the negative $66,000 actually got a lot better. They were factoring in there a loss from the Catalano case, a large one, and it didn't happen. So that 66 will improve. And secondly, I did have a conversation with Jose Irizarry, Franklin Company broker. He does not think, in his opinion, that the events in Japan will have any negative impact on our renewals, and he's actually predicting now we'll have a slight decrease in the approximately $2.6 million insurance policy renewals. And secondly, the HR study, we got 10 responses back. This is the Finance, Human Resources, Town, Human Resources Board of Ed, and the Retirement Administration. We got 10 responses. One was disqualified, so I never got to see that one. There's going to be 9 proposals evaluated by the team of Mr. Campbell, myself, Mr. Simon, Regina Williams from the Board of Education, and Maureen Cast. And the only 2 that I really recognize they did work here was the Hay Group and the Matrix Group, who have extensive background in municipal work in this area. We have to have them rated and turned into the the purchasing department by April 18th. 8th, is it 8th? Okay, and I believe I have a different sheet because the meeting was supposed to be for the 21st. April. Okay, I have a different sheet. 8th and 11th, and I guess Chairman Walker asked about the timeline. I think we could probably have a presentation by the month of September if this goes through the summer in a normal process. Anyone have any other questions on the Comptroller's report? I'll answer them now.
Questions? Mr. Norton?
I don't have a question, but I'd like to comment on under the risk management because the audit committee, and I'll do it here because the controller has addressed it. Back in October, the audit committee authorized us to do a workers' compensation risk management field review. We expected to have it back from CIRMA, Connecticut Interlocal Risk Management Agency, in time for the preparation for the fiscal 12 budget, and we have not yet received it, and we're unable to have it be utilized during the budget process, and we don't expect to be able to receive it before the April meeting. And the audit committee expressed its displeasure at the fact that both there was a lack of response and the fact that it took much longer than the 60 days we were advised of. And as you will see in my report for the audit committee, this contract has expired with CIRMA, and we do believe that this is probably something that should be put out to bid for other third-party administrators, TPAs, to replace CIRMA to do the administrative work.
Can I respond?
Sure.
Just a follow-up. I did get at 4:59 tonight a draft of the report, and CIRMA's coming tomorrow to go through the draft, and it will be ready for the April meeting. And secondly, I agree with Mr. Norton's comments. However, there are 2 contracts. There's one for third-party administration and workers' compensation, and they do assist the separate contract, the law department on liability, auto, and property claims. So there'd be two two contracts, and what I would suggest is that there at least be a full-time risk manager or a private, if we privatize it, on board to lead the charge on that. It would present a hardship going through a change in third-party administrators for them two functions without a full-time risk manager, or at least a professional in a privatized capacity.
Okay. The only points that I want to make relative to the report is that we've talked about the Catalano matter and the positive effect it's having on our potential positive effect it's having our renewal. I think we need to keep in mind, when we do approve settlements, that a lot of times we either throw in the policy or what have you, and we say, well, it's not costing us any additional amount. Well, even a payout of a large amount, even if we're capped at our deductible of $500 or $1 million, the larger the payout will eventually catch up with us through our premiums.
Yeah, they look at the 5-year history of the loss runs. Exactly.
So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind.
That's the follow-up question to that one.
Yes.
So do they look at our loss history if we pay 100% of the loss,
They do. They look at the total claims.
even if they don't pay anything?
Yes, they look at the impact. For example, a few years we had a $9 million and a $10 million claim. They look at the total impact
What
on
about the $40,000 claim?
They look at the work history of every claim that's paid out,
All right, thank you.
except for the ones that are under $5,000 that don't go through the process, like a mailbox or a pothole.
Okay. Any other questions?
We're going to come to the audit committee.
Yeah, this is the comptroller's report. Okay. Can I have a motion to accept the comptroller's report?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Norton, second by Ms. Tarkington. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. Is there a motion to accept the treasurer's report? Moved by Mr. Norton, second by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion?
Yes, I'd like to comment upon the report of OPEB, which is included in here, which indicates for the period as of March 16th that the OPEB trust had an $804,000 decline in value. Actually, 35% of that was recouped last Thursday and Friday, and there's probably an additional recovery of the $804,000 today with today's market performance.
Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstention. Thank you, Mr. Mynarski. Items 7, 8, and 9 now come before us. Our standing committee reports, our liaison reports, and our special project team reports. I know Mr. Simon has a question about the audit committee report, so let's first go to the other written report, and that's the revaluation team report. Any questions or comments? Okay, audit committee, Mr. Simon.
So on the second page, the bottom of the third paragraph, this is my favorite sentence, which says, to perform an audit of compliance with the existing policy by the volunteers. This refers to, I believe, health insurance benefits?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what that policy refers to?
It's a procedure
I'm just reading. I'm reading the report, the last sentence of the third paragraph. Well, because I asked this question, because one of the questions I asked before was to try and get a copy of this policy or the accountability criteria for volunteers. I don't know if we've heard back from anybody yet on this request. I asked through Mr. Geiger to ask the fire department for this.
I spoke to the chief today, and he said he did respond to you on the tax abatement.
Say that again?
He responded to you about the tax abatement.
He didn't send anything to me.
Follow up with him then.
Okay.
But I would like, this was one of the things I wanted to see was, I'd love to see if this policy exists and the accountability criteria.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, let me just
So clearly, this was a hot topic discussed during the budget process by the Budget Committee. My understanding is that the Audit Committee has taken it up from an audit standpoint, and that there are still many questions about this, I'll say, program. And when I say the program, I mean the entire volunteer program and whether it's the tax abatement or the health care, based on the information that was provided. And a lot of information has been provided. And some of it has raised even additional concerns. So I think the sooner we get that information, and has everyone on the BET, I get lost in who's actually getting the information, but because this is, or in particular, because this is going to be, in all likelihood, a further subject of discussion at our budget meeting, has everyone received all of the information regarding the volunteers and the tax credits and the health insurance and the car tax credits? Has that been widely distributed to everybody?
I would say no.
Okay. So, Roland, so have a conversation with the chief about the request for the policy, if it exists.
The accounting, what is it, the accountability criteria?
And then if you could package that material, and anything else the chief wants to add into there, or Mr. Kelly, I suspect he's going to want to weigh in on this. He is responsible for at least the recruitment and retention, so I suspect he might want to be part of that conversation. And then get that out to the BET sometime this week so that we can have at least a little bit of time to digest, and if there are follow-up questions, so that the chief and Mr. Kelly have a chance to respond before next Thursday, the 31st. Okay. Sure, hold on, Mr. On this, let's stay on this topic before we open it up to anything else in the Audit Committee. So, Mr. Finger, did you have a comment? Mr. Norton, did you have one?
Yes, I wanted to follow up. The discussion in the Audit Committee evolved from the fact that approximately 12 years ago, a three-person RTM committee was created, and which included Bill Kelly, who's a member of this board at the current time, with Jim Clifford and Joan Caldwell, on the issue of recruitment of volunteers. And the recommendations that came out of that, which I believe is the policy we're talking about, was to make a small payment for all the responses that each one of the volunteers made to a call, and also to extend the health insurance benefits to the volunteers. That's the context in which the Audit Committee discussed it, relating to the policy procedure that had been set up a number of years ago at the recommendation of that committee to the RTM.
Thank you. Further sorry, Mr. Mason.
To move the volunteer programs along, during the Budget Committee, we ran into lots of discussions on this, and the Budget Committee is recommending to you a reduction in the healthcare and a policy. With that being said, Mr. Finger and I attended a meeting called by the First Selectman with the various parties, Chief Kick and the various volunteer groups involved, and they're probably going to ask us for a reinstatement on that. If that is the case, there will be a condition on that where we would bring the whole volunteer recruitment program back before the Budget Committee. They'll need to do this before the close of the fiscal year because of their health insurance dates, to give us a chance to really put a grasp on this. Because, as you saw in the material, there's inconsistencies, and we just want accountability and consistent policy. So I assume that next Thursday we'll see a request for reinstatement. I would probably be one moving a condition on that, and then we'll have it at the Budget Committee before the end of the fiscal year.
And so without jumping the gun on making any assumptions as to whether or not that would be approved or disapproved, assuming that it's going to come forward, I would ask that you talk to the chief about getting that information to us sooner rather than later. It doesn't help to get that information last minute and ask this board to build a consensus around adding or making an amendment to the budget. On top of that, I would like to see what are the goals and measurements for our recruitment and retention of volunteers, because I want to better understand what it is that we're doing in that arena in the context of a total dollar amount spent. Okay. Further questions on the audit report?
So one follow-up then. So we're expecting the fire department to make the request for reinstatement, and only the fire department,
Well, any money,
as opposed to volunteers.
well, any member of the BET can make the request.
Right.
But I suspect, and as history has shown us, that if it's not coming from a department or the first selectman, that those types of requests aren't very successful.
It's a fair warning.
Item 10, any other questions or comments on any of the reports, either written or otherwise? Okay. Item 10 now comes before us, the chairman's report. This past month, or since our last meeting, has been interesting. We certainly, let me thank all the BET members who attended RTM meetings, whether it was the full RTM meeting or any of the district or committee meetings, to discuss the proposed sense of the meeting resolution. The debates were helpful, certainly helpful into understanding where people's mindset were relative to the budget and to the process. And I will say that I was pleased with the sentiment that people still appreciate the charter, that the process in the charter is one that that they still uphold, and that there is a process. And that process we amended several years ago to give the first selectman the power to present a consolidated budget, present that budget to the BET, and then have that budget ultimately adopted with any deletions by the RTM. And so it was discussed certainly in the committees that I was present at, but I know in many of the others, this notion that the RTM every year has the ability to reduce the budget or delete it to a level that they feel comfortable with. But the word accountability was used quite often, and certainly relative to any changes and drilling down into the specific changes. And so I thought it was a good discussion for that purpose. For all of those who were either not present or haven't read any of the media reports, that sense of the meeting resolution, by all accounts, was going to fail, and therefore a motion to postpone indefinitely was made, and that passed overwhelmingly. So there was actually no vote on the merits, although many of the committees, I think the largest support for it came from one committee with 4 votes. Many of the other committees were either around the 2 or the 1 vote in favor, and all of the other votes against or abstentions. I did have the opportunity to meet before the RTM Chairman's Committee. I think there's a better name for that. I just can't remember it. Moderator, sorry, the moderator's a special meeting for chairmans. And my sole function was to discuss Witherell. It was to discuss with them potential alternative avenues to bring Witherell forward, Project Renew, and just to see if the RTM had any thoughts about that. The thinking being, once it goes through HDG and we all take a look at it from a financial standpoint, really this is a discussion that the town needs to make, although it was pointed out that the RTM has debated this at least twice. The moderator corrected somebody who said once, but he said at least twice. But that certainly times have changed and events have changed and economics have changed. And so the thinking, at least preliminarily, is for the finance department, HDG, and the BET to run through the financials of the modified Project Renew, and then sometime in the fall be able to bring this to the RTM. Maybe not necessarily on a specific bonding resolution, although that's still to be discussed, but certainly to get their input. As I indicated to them, funding Nathaniel Witherell, we can fund it. It's simply a question of priority and a question of if there is a requirement to fund Project Renew, that's necessarily going to bump something else out, depending on how our models go. So under the current budget, for instance, if we had to put in additional funding for Nathaniel Witherell, we either could increase the mill rate or we would have to delete from either operating capital or what have you. And so there are trade-offs. And so based on that, the RTM was generally receptive, or the chairman were generally receptive. And it appears that there's not going to be an RTM special committee, but there will be an RTM 3-person committee that will assist the BET and HDG and Nathaniel Witherell in their review of Project Renew Modified. It'll be 1 member from Health and Human Services, one member from Finance Committee, and one member from the BOC. I only right now know of the Health and Human Services representative, and I'm still waiting to hear from Finance and the BOC so that we can round that out. My understanding is also from Nathaniel Witherell that next week they will hopefully have adopted a revised business plan and the modified Project Renew at their board meeting next week, I believe? Next Monday. And then once that happens, the Finance Department will turn it over to HDG. First ask for a time frame. They wanted to see what the scope of the changes were going to be relative to their original Project Renew, and then give us a quote on the timeline and amount to do the work. We will then meet with everybody and then report back. You should also be aware that Ms. Barton and I are working through evaluations for the comptroller and the assessor. We're not only working through the evaluations, I know we just completed one, we're doing the SMART goals for the 6 months until July 1st or through June of this year. And then we've asked both of them to do their SMART goals for the following year. And our goal is to get them onto the same rotation as all other MC employees, so we don't have this overlap. And I think structurally, too, with BET elections, this will also have a better continuity in terms of evaluation, so that we're not always doing the evaluations at the end of the year, whether it's Christmas time or New Year's, and it's always been problematic for us. So we're optimistic that this change will benefit everyone, including the comptroller and the assessor in terms of increases or change in salaries. Okay. Item 11 now comes before us, discussion of April and May board meeting dates. So first, let's take up the May board meeting date. I know in the audience is our tax collector. I'm presuming that he's here for that, although maybe it's just to listen. Taxpayer. Just a taxpayer. So there had been a request by our tax collector. We've talked about this now, I think, 2 months. And at last month, we agreed to defer this discussion. The RTM meets on Monday. Monday, I believe that's May 9th. Thank you. Tuesday, May 10th is the Budget Committee meeting. 11th, I already know that there are conflicts with BET members. And our meeting originally was scheduled for the 16th. And I don't believe we should hold the meeting on Friday, the 12th. 13th, sorry. So that only leaves May 11th. Now, before anybody comments, 12th, sorry.
Thursday. Or the 10th.
Thursday, May 12th, but if it's the 10th, then we'd have to do the Budget Committee the same day.
Or the week before.
Or the week before, but doing it the week before then conflicts with the RTM committee meetings.
Or we
So
do it earlier than the meetings.
we could.
Yes. Just don't
So-
include, that's
All
a
right.
possibility.
I won't specifically preclude it, although I'd prefer not to do it that way. But here's before we begin the discussion, if there is even one member who can't make it, obviously it's an important enough discussion. It's the budget meeting that people are calling in from all over the world to talk about, to discuss. And so if there is any conflict, we will simply leave the 16th, unless you also tell me you're conflicted out on the 16th, and then, well, you'll miss either meeting. So right now, we have the 12th, which is probably the easiest in terms of scheduling, or we do have the possibility of doing it the 10th and moving the Budget Committee meeting up the week, and then just doing the Budget Committee meeting earlier than the BET meeting. So, does anybody, let me just ask it this way, does anybody have a conflict with the 12th? In the evening. In the evening, yes.
It should all be so simple.
Yes. We are a government of volunteers, and if people want to be here to see our meeting, they should be here to hear and see our meeting. Plus, for those of us who work, it's difficult to be here during the day.
So you want to move it to the 12th?
The 12th. Want a motion for that? Sure, we can make that official.
Moved by Mr. Norton,
Second?
second by Ms. Tarkington.
6 PM.
There's a risk, but I think if we gently ask. Now, don't forget, this is, the RTM will have passed the budget. We set the mill rate. Historically, not many people have attended that meeting, but there are some, and so even if we need to get the cone room or some other room, I think we can make that work.
The motion, did it say a time? Is it 6:30?
Our meeting starts at 6:30, so we're going to keep it at 6:30 unless, for some reason, from a room perspective. Roland, normally Elaine does that for us? Okay, so if this motion passes, then if you can ask Elaine to do this, and then send out an email making sure they were notified of where it's going to be. All right, all those in favor of May 12th signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. Okay. So Thursday, May 12th. Now, Roland, this has nothing to do, does this matter relative to any, we're not in violation of any public notice by moving this date already, right? Okay. Just have to post it. Okay. Fair enough. So the next item that I would like to discuss, and this one's much less important, you're welcome, is I am unavailable during our April meeting. I have certainly been willing to turn this over to our capable vice chairman, Mr. Campbell, who has willingly accepted that position. And so once again, if anybody is conflicted out, then I would suggest not moving it. But one of the dates, certainly that at least that the Republican caucus is available would be the following Monday of April 25th. Once again, if it poses any problem to anyone, I would prefer to leave the date and just have me not present. Monday the 25th.
That's correct.
Okay. So the only, is it for the week? Is it the?
No, for me, it's just that day I have a memorial service.
So let me throw out the 26th.
That's fine.
I can't make the 26th or the 27th.
Okay, I'll try one last one at the 28th.
No, I can't do the 28th.
Okay, so we'll leave the date. And you can all tell me how Mr. Campbell does in his,
Maiden voyage.
Steve, just since Larry brought it up the last time and to try and accommodate you, what about, again, doing the budget committee earlier on the 12th and holding the BET meeting thereafter? Or, I'm not sure about the 14th, but just to explore dates before it came up? I'm not sure whether those dates would work. Again,
14th.
I'm sorry? I just,
well,
to make sure we
12th is
look
the
at both
12th is
sides.
the budget committee? Is that right?
HR budget, yeah.
Does anybody have a conflict with the 12th?
The 12th is our budget committee.
Right. Let's assume that we could rearrange that. Does anybody have a conflict with the 12th?
Yeah, especially if you don't have to start ours at 6:30, you can move it back a little bit, move these
All
back.
right, I'll send out an email. Once again, I apologize for this,
Is that okay with you? I was just trying to.
for this conflict, and once again, I think the meeting can go along just fine without me.
Let's do it.
Why do you want to
Let's
send
go
me
for a
one
12th.
We can settle it now. If the budget committee can work out a different time or a different date, either way, we can do it the 12th.
You can move the budget committee up, the HR committee can move its.
Well, if the two committee chairmen are, if the two committee chairmen are comfortable with that change and scheduling a meeting for the committee, then April 12th,
We'll make it work.
is that a motion?
Wait. So what time are we
Second.
going to do this on the 12th?
This meeting will still be 6:30, unless we want to move it to 7
Can move to the
and give it,
7.
Yeah, give us a
time.
little bit of,
Okay.
give us an extra half hour or so.
Yep.
So 7 o'clock on the 12th.
let me just make sure.
Okay. Make it work.
Bear with me. Okay, so the motion by Mr. Norton was April 12th at 7 PM. Is there a second? Second by
Second.
Ms. Tarkington? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention?
May I inquire when the budget committee meeting that would be?
What we will probably do is, depending on the items, is we'll just back those meetings up a little bit. Typically, HR is at 4:30, and we are at 6:30, so we may just move it to 3:30, 4:30. We'll look at the items on the agenda,
So you're
too.
planning to have the budget meeting be the same day as the BET meeting, just a little earlier in the day?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that accommodation.
Cancel the caucus for that day.
Item 12 now comes before us. I just put this on the agenda as a new business, and then next month I hopefully will put it on the old business topic. And that is, I know in all the committees you're working through topics. I do believe that over the course of the last 4 or so years, maybe even 5 or 6, we've seen a decrease in the number of applications from departments because, quite frankly, they're living within the budgets. They're appreciating the fact that if they're looking overruns on some areas, that they're taking from other areas and living within their means. And so I also think as a function of our economy, there seem to be less grants that are coming forward that we're approving, and we've caught up to them through the good work of our law committee and the resolutions. So what I'd like to be able to do is use this time. I am always surprised and pleasantly surprised of how many people watch Channel 79 and watch this program. I was just out this weekend, and I know Mickey Marullo, who watches this and seems to remember things that happen at meetings that I don't even remember. I suggest he should take some sleeping pills or something maybe to help him fall asleep, but he seems to enjoy watching us on TV. And because of that, there are many topics that I think the public would be interested in that certainly we have all the knowledge, but it's confined to confined to everyone in this room, the 12 of us and our staff. So I do think that we should think about what projects, what issues we'd like to talk about, maybe not vote on as a body, but certainly get information and have a dialogue. Some things that come to mind, obviously, are the HR study when it's finally completed. We've talked a lot during the budget process about shared services, whether it's IT, print shop, building maintenance. We've talked a little bit about an administrative pool for what I call as first floor town hall, and obviously Project Renew as it moves forward. So those are a few items that I thought off the top of my head. If you have any, I'd like you to just send them to Peter and to Roland and Elaine, and then what I'd like to do is work through that list and then try to set one up for either every month or every month that we don't have as many items. So that we can get some useful information also out to the public, even something as the pavement management program or something like that, a capital item. So if you can think about that, that's your small homework assignment over the next month. Okay, item 13 now comes before us, the approval of the BET meeting minutes for February 22nd, 2011. Is there a motion?
So move.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Raymer. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstention. So
Committee and district assignments.
before we leave, I probably should have said this in my chairman's report. I seem to be doing a lot of talking today, so I apologize. 2 things. One, to remind everyone, not only in our present audience, but out there in TV land, public hearing is March 29th here in the Town Hall Meeting Room, 7 p.m. That's the public hearing on the 2011-2012 budget. Additionally, we will then hold the BET budget meeting on the March 31st, 7 p.m., again here. There is no public hearing relative to that meeting, but it is a public meeting. And then lastly, as you all saw today, there's an email out to all of you. I'm asking for you to sign up, and in preference, 1 and 2 preferences for the April RTM district and RTM committees, and the May RTM district and the committees, in the hopes that we get out, discuss the budget, both in May and then preceding that in April, to make sure we're ahead of the curve on any of these budget discussions. So I thank all of you who have already turned in some of your preferences. For those who haven't, get them to me as soon as possible. I'll work with them and hopefully put people where they want to go, but then if not, just make assignments. Thank you also for telling me which days you're not available. That's always helpful. And with that, we'll get that assignment sheet out, and we'll be able to address the RTM in April and in May.
Did you send yours?
Is there a motion to adjourn? Sorry.
Do you want to comment on the amendment forms I asked?
Oh, sorry, yes. So I spoke with Roland. As you know, every year we try to get our amendments. You know, we still have the public hearing. This is always a little bit of an awkward time where people are asking our opinions about the budget and whether or not, what's going to pass, what's not going to pass, and yet we still have a public hearing out there. Understanding that, certainly many BET members, if you're going to make a change to the budget off of what the Budget Committee did. If you already know, or at least have an idea of what you intend to do, whether it's a subject to release, whether it's a deletion, an addition, a change in a resolution, please, please, please try to get that information to Roland by this Friday. He is going to send out the standard amendment form so that you can plug it in there. It is much easier to get the full body to agree with your position if you've sent it out in advance. And especially with all the attorneys on the board, especially where there's a subject to release, it's better to wordsmith this week than it is to try to wordsmith it on Thursday evening of the 31st. And so we have capable people to be able to help out in that regard. And so if you get it out sooner rather than later, that's always appreciated. Okay. We're adjourned. Thank you.